Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be introducing Dr. Patrick J. De Silva. He is the visiting teaching assistant professor in Islamic studies at the University of Denver, and is one of the faculty members of the joint PhD program in the study of religion. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes, well, David, thank you for the invitation to do this video. It's great to contribute to, students getting to know more about us on the other side of the classroom, so to speak, on the faculty side. So, just to do a quick introduction, I am one of those strange people who has 3 degrees in religious studies. I didn't go to college thinking that that would ever happen, but then by the end of probably by midterms of my first semester in college, I was converted to the cause, so to speak. Initially really focused on biblical studies. So I did my undergrad in religious studies and then in classics, specifically classical languages.
Wow.
About halfway through my undergrad, I decided to switch focus from, like kind of Greek um, and Hebrew and switch over to studying Arabic, which was of personal significance for me because I grew up partially in Sudan, which is, in sort of North and East Africa.
Yeah.
And so I had grown up sort of surrounded by like Arabic in a Muslim environment, even though that wasn't my family background. I did my undergrad at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. Then I went straight through, which I'm not sure I would recommend, to get my master's in theological studies from Harvard Divinity School. And then given that I had not had a break from school from kindergarten through my master's, I took what turned out to be I think a 7-year retreat from academia, at least from being a student. I very quickly found myself back on college campuses, teaching primarily Arabic language courses, and that turned into teaching stuff on Islam, various Islam-related courses, kind of world religions, and other humanities courses. Then I had a job at the University of Colorado, Boulder, so at CU Boulder, teaching Arabic full time in the Asian Languages and Civilizations department. And at the end of that 3 years, I decided to go back to school for the final time, which led me to Chapel Hill, which is where I did my PhD, focusing on Islamic studies, but within the religious studies PhD program at UNC Chapel Hill. Um, During that time, I discovered this topic, which beforehand I knew nothing about, which really is, in a nutshell, is just Muslim engagement with yoga, especially in a South Asian context, and more broadly in what we call the Persianate sphere. And so that turned into a dissertation on these texts on using what's called the science of the breath for divination purposes, texts that were initially translated from Shaivite Tantra, so written in Sanskrit and Hindi and other Indian vernacular languages,
Wow.
translated initially into Persian, later on into Urdu and Arabic. Um, and then that circulate quite widely within the sort of Persianate sphere, as we refer to it. Um, Texts that kind of go from the medieval to the early modern into the modern period. And then that actually is now finally, at long last, culminated in what I hope will be first of many books, but my first book, co-authored with Carl Ernst, who was my PhD advisor. The book is called Breathtaking Revelations, The Science of Breath from the 50 Kamarupa verses to Hazrat Inayat Khan. And so what we did in the book is we present 2 texts that we then provide commentaries on. One is this earliest Science of Breath text that dates back about 500 years. That's translated from Hindi into Persian. And then we present an early 20th century text by Hazrat Inayat Khan, who is an Indian Sufi teacher who came to England and to the US in the early 20th century. And we talk about how these texts are remarkably similar to one another, and they testify to the way in which these teachings have continued to circulate across multiple languages, and they kind of poke holes in this idea of religious identity as like I'm on this team and I can never cross the boundary onto the other team,
Mhm.
that sort of anxiety about which team you are on. which in a lot of ways we can apply not just to the study of religion and religious identity, but also to gender, to sexuality, to class, so many different things. That obsession with boundaries and this focus, this idea that there's boundaries are rigid, is an artificial construction that my scholarship contributes, along with many others, to poking holes and
Mhm.
breaking down that idea.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. UNC Chapel Hill is a great university. Have some connections over there. So, but yeah, you're currently right now, as you said, faculty of the joint PhD program in the study of religion. So, kind of what led you from doing this scholarship all the way to teaching here now at the University of Denver?
Well, when I finished my PhD in 2018, my wife and I decided that we were going to move back to Colorado, which is where my wife is from and where I also lived, originally from 2005 to 2013 before doing the PhD. Um, and so when I arrived here, I, started teaching at a few different places. And I had taught a lot of these places before, like at CU Boulder, at Front Range Community College.
Mm,
Started teaching at University of Colorado and Colorado Springs, which, given that I live in Boulder, thankfully, that commute was mostly remote. So that made it
nice.
easier.
Yeah,
Um, Not entirely remote, but mostly remote. And then this opportunity to teach in the religious studies department at DU emerged kind of totally unexpectedly. And that has since developed into me having the chance to work with a variety of not just undergrad, but MA and now some JDP students. And I really enjoy working with all those different levels, and especially working with JDP students at different stages in their careers.
yeah,
Because as you know, being kind of as you approach the end of your second year, you kind of feel like a different person, kind of
yeah,
compared to when you first show up. And so that's something that I've really enjoyed when I've had the opportunity, is to be with people throughout their journey or for a big chunk of it. When I
yeah.
taught Arabic, it was amazing to have students who I knew them when they didn't know the alphabet. And then 3 years later, I could have a complete conversation with them, you know, on like a subject they were studying in college. And that was, really gratifying to be
Nice.
one small contributor to that type of growth and development.
Yeah,
So
that's great. You have a favorite part of the JDP since teaching here?
I think as I've learned more and more about it, I think the comps process and the commitment that I can tell that the faculty have to revisiting and reevaluating this kind of core piece of the process, because like the coursework is fairly straightforward. The proposal, and even it might not seem like this to you, but even like the dissertation is relatively straightforward. But
Mhm.
comps are an area where an institution demonstrates what its values are in terms of how it treats its students. And having been part of just some of the conversations, I know there's lots of other ones going on, but just some of the conversations, the discussion about what do we want to do with this stage in the program? What makes the most sense for the students? What makes the most sense for us as faculty? A lot of institutions aren't going to engage in that type of discernment, which is, yes, intellectual, but is also emotional in its nature, thinking about what is our responsibility to the students.
Right.
Um, so that's, yeah, I think that's been my favorite part of the JDP so far. Maybe that's kind of nitty gritty,
No, no, no.
but
I
that's what I
mean,
enjoy.
yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because especially the student perspective I have is, and really drew me to the program is like the flexibility that it has and offers, and I could tell the passion that like you expressed to
Yeah.
from faculty. But yeah, moving on from the JDP, and thinking more broadly here, do you have any advice for current or prospective students seeking religious studies PhD programs? And I know that's kind of a broad question.
It's no, it's super broad. I think, and would be what I would say to anyone pursuing a PhD, particularly in the humanities, is you want to be in a program, if that's what you feel called to do. You want to be part of a program that is going to prepare you for the likelihood that you will not end up in a tenure track position
Hmm.
because you can be the greatest candidate in the world and the numbers are just not in anyone's favor. And so that's no like knock on any current graduate student or anyone on the job market. I mean, I myself have never held a tenure track position.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't really have any plans to do so.
Sure.
Um, so I think like so for me, one of the things that really drew me to the program at UNC Chapel Hill is I looked at these scholars specifically in Islamic studies because that was my focus, and I saw them doing a lot of public facing scholarship. I saw them doing NPR interviews and or things like that, talking to, real people.
Hmm.
um, and working really hard to influence the conversation taking place in the general public. And sometimes that would mean, news media. Sometimes it would mean interfacing with policy folks like in state and federal government,
Wow.
um, whatever it might be. So that was important for me. And that's really been helpful for me as I've kind of been doing this career thing. Um, I think, unfortunately, there are still quite a few programs that don't give much like credence to this position, which to me is just
Hmm.
reality, which is a whole kind of ivory tower argument that we could we could deconstruct. Um, but it's our ethical, our moral, I would say even our sacred obligation to our students that if they're going to entrust these institutions and us as faculty with these, an extended period of time. It's not like you come in just for a year. I was in my PhD program for 5 years, and I was considered a very quick, you know, I was like to finish in 5 years was, not that many people do that.
Hmm.
Um, and so even if someone's going to be with the JDP or another PhD program for, let's say, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, um, you want to make sure that you're able to be honest with those students about the resources you have available
Hmm.
and that you really make sure that they know the reality that they're going to be entering on the other side, the sort of economic reality, because there's so many things you can do with a PhD in religious studies besides teach in a college or university department of, religious studies or philosophy. There's so many different things you can do, and we owe that to our students. I believe that really strongly. And I think if we fail to offer that perspective and that support, um, then we're doing our students a disservice.
Yeah, I agree totally. Um, yeah, and speaking more broadly here about religious studies as a field, what do you think is the biggest challenge that religious studies needs to tackle here? Um,
Yeah, I read news stories occasionally about different colleges and universities that are facing budget crises and departments that are on the usual suspects of, oh, this might get, axed. Religious studies is on that list at some institutions, and I think part of that, and then to compare that with, say, like philosophy or history, is because religious studies as an academic discipline, distinct from theology, right, doesn't
mhm,
really get started until, let's say like 60, 70 years ago, we'll ballpark it at that, then there still is this attitude that what we do is somehow not integral to higher education.
mm,
And I
mm,
would want to argue the opposite, that what we do is it's critical that if you don't have some place on your campus, now whether it's a religious studies department or something else, that doesn't really matter to me. But you need to have a place on your campus where students can learn to engage with religion in a critical manner, because guess what? The secularization thesis has been disproven, right? there was this idea that as societies became more and more technologically advanced, they would become less religious.
Mhm.
The United States alone is the single biggest, sort of counterpoint to that. I mean, when I lived in North Carolina, I kid you not, there were Baptist churches on multiple corners at multiple intersections just in, Durham where I lived. Um, and we can take it far broader than that. A religion is an a part of this world. And if we don't equip our students, our undergraduate students, let alone grad students, but focusing on our undergrad students, if we don't equip our students with the tools to critically analyze the religious discourses in their own communities, regardless of whether it's Christianity or Islam or Judaism or
Mhm.
Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever it is, then again, we're doing them a disservice because, with this like recent case with this judge in Alabama who, explicitly uses religious rationale for this ruling on IVF,
Yep.
right? It's like we need to equip students with the ability to go themselves as a, 20 something year old college student. I want my undergraduate students to be able to read about this judge and his rationale for making these decisions. And I don't want them to have to email me for clarification.
Yeah.
One, because that would be a lot of emails and we already get a lot. But
Yes.
number two,
Woo.
the whole idea of education is that you learn to do things independently. And I mean, you work with others, but you don't need to always take a class in something. You need to learn tools that then you can use for the rest of your life.
Right.
Um, so that's one thing that we as a discipline need to be a lot better on. And I think, frankly, there's economic pressure for us to do that because just within university environments, because we have to continually justify our existence. And that's not just religious studies departments. I just read yesterday that there's this huge sort of plant collection at Duke University, which has like a multi-billion-dollar endowment. Um, and the university has decided that they aren't going to keep up this sort of massive plant collection, this herbarium. So they're going to try and like move it to other places. But all these other research institutes are like, oh, I can't believe Duke is going to give up on its duty to, knowledge. Um, so it's not a pressure that's unique to the study of religion or to religious studies. It's
Yeah.
something that we share with a lot of other disciplines. So it's a lot of, we need to look at the story, the narrative. Can we craft a narrative that makes the case, that solidifies the case in the general public's sort of imagination that what we do is just as critical as some of these other disciplines that people just assume, like, oh, well, you can't have a college without XYZ department.
Mm.
Like, I want the study of religion to be part of that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree too. And thanks so much for sharing and talking about here today, your position within the JDP and the academic scholarship that you engage with, and for sharing your recent book that will be coming out soon with us. Again, thanks for having us. And this was Dr. Patrick J. De Silva, who is visiting teaching assistant professor in Islamic studies at the University of Denver. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, David. It was great getting to have a conversation with you. Thanks so much.